All right, want to thank you all for joining us as we continue our discussion, the Christian's response on social injustice. And so we're going to get started with a word of prayer, and we are going to ask Chaplain Newton if you could start us.
Let's pray. Father, we just want to thank you for this Sabbath day. We thank you for this opportunity now that we can discuss things that are important, not only to the community, Lord, but to you, to us as well. So, Father, now just guide our thoughts and minds now, Lord, we pray. In Jesus' name, we ask this all. Amen.
Amen. So I thank Pastor Newton for that introduction and yes, beautiful.
Definitely. So, devil is busy. But this week has been a very interesting week. We've had a lot of comments from President Trump. We've had even comments from our former president, Barack Obama. We've had some interesting comments from NFL quarterbacks and athletes this week about what's been going on in the social or the racial tensions in our country. And so I like what Barack Obama, some of the things that he stated in his conference. And one of the things that he was talking about is, being our brother's keeper. And, he had an initiative when he was president about a brother's keepers initiative. And I want to ask this to us all, especially in light of what's going on. How can we be our brother's keeper during these times of social injustice? And I want to pass that question to to Elder Tracy. I see he has the cap shirt on. I didn't even realize that. The Colin Kaepernick.
I know that. All right, good one.
Yeah, we'll get a couple in the mail to you, brothers. I know you're all eager to have one.
Yes.
Time and to ideas, Pastor Sai as well. I'll get you one as well. But the idea of being our brother's keeper, I think that the initiative is to be there to help and to hold accountable, and at the same time be there to offer support. I think it's very interesting that it has become so visible and so real with the recent events that it is incumbent upon us to be our brother's keeper. We have many of us have matriculated to different institutions. We have advanced individually and as a people. I think there's been many advancements that we just didn't have before, but with those advancements, it's become abundantly clear and evident that there are certain roadblocks along the way. And so I think it's incumbent upon us to lend what we get as we strive forward to those who are behind us, as was done for us in our plight as well. So I think that during these times of social injustice, it would be remiss for any of us to have made advancements personally and not look at the corporate or collective effort of our people and realize that there's more for us to do as a unit. And I think I'm seeing that done more than I have in times past. We obviously have a few moments where we see some lapses by individuals, but for the most part, I think we're doing a better job making one another aware. Just by virtue of even doing this today, I think is a method of us getting that type of accountability out for our fellow brothers and sisters to be able to know, here's what we're doing, here's what we need to do, and here's information on how to do it. So I think I'm passing back off. I'm not sure if
Pastor Newton.
Okay.
All right. Ask that same question, if we can, to Elder Farrington.
Interesting question. I think when we look at being our brother's keeper, we know that it's going back an account in the Bible between Cain and Abel. And what we have to realize, it's not hard to identify the brother. But we need to shine a light on keeping or being a keeper. what the phrase suggests is that you have some resources to apply, to lend, to give. It suggests that you yourself have kept yourself in God's presence, have kept yourself on your knees, have kept yourself from the same plight that your brother may be in, so that you can be a resource. What are you keeping him from? Keeping him from an emotional a pit, keeping him from financial decline, keeping him from a spiritual pitfall. So when you think about being your brother keeper, you think that first you have to, are you a resource? Are you someone that your brother can turn to in time of trouble? Are you someone to provide clear and sound guidance? We read in Psalms 1, blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly. So when time of trouble comes and someone's coming to you for advice or for emotional support, are you of a sound mind? So when I think of how we can be our brother's keeper, we first have to be in a position spiritually first, I say, and then whatever accoutrements or resources, benefits we can apply, whether it be financial, whether it be something from guidance. I think that we have to draw from that. I say, how can we be our brother's keepers? Just being and making ourselves available to someone in their time of need and struggle.
All right, just getting warmed up. And so, you know, we're looking at the country and what has happened, what's taken place. We see where it happened in Minneapolis and this social injustice. However, we see all of these protests, not just in Minneapolis. We see it in California. We see it in New York. We see it in Atlanta. We see it in South Florida. And I guess I want to how effective is the peaceful protest in solving the country's racial issues? Is it even effective? And I want to ask that question of Pastor Sai at this time.
Yes, I believe that the peaceful protests are very, very effective. As we've been seeing, so many statements, it's indicative of many statements that we've seen from many national companies across the country.
We're gonna hold off, Pastor Sai. I think that there's some reception issues, so we're going to maybe come back with you to try to work that out because we could barely hear you. So let's ask that question to Chaplain Newton.
Peaceful protests. The thing with the situation, I believe peaceful protests do work to an extent, but it just depends on certain areas, because at the same time, it just how you carry yourself in the protest. You know, who's in the protest, because not all protests are peaceful. Now, I do believe in peaceful protests, but at this time, I don't think that the means always necessarily work, because we're still experiencing the same things. We're still experiencing the same things in our community. And I don't believe not only the protest, but I believe it starts from the top. There's a lot of issues in the top. There's a lot of issues with our government. There's a lot of issues with just, you know, the people who are in charge. Their mindset and the way that they think is more the issues. And sometimes when we do these protests, I don't think that Donald Trump is thinking about, oh, well, they're protesting. I just think that he just makes it into a joke. And so I believe in peaceful protests, but at the same time, it can go either way.
We'll ask that same question to Elder Tracy. Do you think that the peaceful protests are successful? Is it making an impact?
Chaplain Newton, you're my hero, and I'll explain why in a few moments. Are they effective? We as Christians, we're Protestants. We protested. We resisted a norm, a regime that was in place that was systemic, that was burdensome and overbearing. We as Christians are Protestants. We protested. Jesus protested on the cross. He was told to come down, get out of there. What are you doing? Get out. He protested on the cross. They said, why don't you save yourself? He resisted that. He protested peacefully. I will not come down. And he gave his life up. So are they effective? Yes, they have been effective. Protests in this country have been going on for a long time. Now, it's a very difficult thing because as we talk about a peaceful protest, my mind goes back to 1968. And I think about the two Olympians who peacefully protested against the disparity in America when it came to Black Americans, when it came to individuals who were suffering from poverty, as it came to individuals who had suffered lynchings, and making those type of peaceful protests, very strong statements, but again, peaceful protests. They were ostracized by the American public, but quickly brushed or swept under the rug. And I think what Chaplain Newton is getting at is we've done this before. We've been peaceful before. The civil rights movement, the civil rights era in the 60s, it did bring about a much needed change as it relates to the Civil Rights Act, but it's not enough. And I'm reminded of Malcolm X. And for those of us who read the autobiography or have seen the movie, when he goes to the police department, to the precinct, and he's heard about the dear brother who's been beaten, and he goes and he sees him, and he sees that he's at the point of death, and he says, needs medical attention, and they get medical attention. And the response is, okay, is that enough? And he goes, are you satisfied? He goes, no, I'm not satisfied. And they head over to the hospital and they stand in front of the hospital. And it's one of the most powerful scenes you'll see in a movie when they all look up at the same time. And it shows a unification. They're protesting police brutality. They're protesting the inability to give a Black man and render him aid. And they all look up and they look at Malcolm X, and he literally just does that one move. Again, peaceful protest. But we all remember that one move of the hand. And what we're seeing is it can be effective, but we're still not where we want to be. And so I take that line from Malcolm X where, are you satisfied? Not yet. And so I think Chaplain Newton, just to draw from some of that energy that you just set forth, have the peaceful protests been effective? We've gotten their attention. We've gotten their attention. Pastor Sai, before she dropped off, talked about the national companies. I mean, we've gotten their attention. Internationally, people are responding. We've gotten their attention. Now, for that one individual you just named, Chaplain Newton, his attention span is that of maybe a 6 or 9 month old. Okay. And so what ends up happening is the tweet will come out before it's processed. Oddly enough, if you notice this past week, he has been less responsive than he normally is. I mean, normally he'd been going all off, but he's been somehow tempered than what we normally see. He's still rude, still obnoxious, still taking photo ops with a book that he probably has never touched before. That moment, someone had a little joke about his casino, his hotel. He had a book of himself in the drawer as opposed to a book placed by the Gideons. But moving from there, it's just we have their attention. Peaceful protest is effective in getting attention. The question is, now what? Where do we go from here? And I'll just say last thing and I'm done. Trevor Noah, which is interesting. I'm actually quoting someone from Comedy Central, but very insightful. Some of the views that he's had. He talks about the fact that we get upset about, the burning of Target. And his idea was, as incensed as everyone is about the protest in reacting to what took place, you broke your social contract. We had a social contract that you would just protect and serve. There's a social contract that you just do the right thing, that if you call the police, you can rely on the police to just do the right thing, and that they'll just protect and serve and do what's in the best interest of society. You broke your contract. But what we're dealing with, we keep talking about the reaction to them to that broken contract, when we're not talking about the impetus for protests that go beyond peaceful. So I think the discussion is a little bit premature on the back end. We have to get back to the source. Thank you for the time.
Good we're going to ask that question to Pastor Sai. I know that we had a little issues there, but if you could answer that question, how effective have the peaceful protests been, in your opinion?
I believe the peaceful protests have been very effective. It's indicative. I read something today that said over 151 Black cities across the nation have been protesting. We've seen that it's not only been here in America, but it's gone overseas, places like Germany, London, Berlin, France. So it just shows you that around the world that people are feeling the plight of the Black men and women and those that are Black and brown, that they feel it. They have taken it upon themselves to march peacefully, to stand within the streets, to call out systemic racism, to just, not only protest in the streets, but also people are exposing companies that are supportive of racial institutions. And we also see those institutions calling out people for flooding their inboxes with hateful speech and rhetoric. So for many people that may question the Christians' responsibility, as Elder Tracy said, yes, we are birthed out of protests and we have the greatest model in Christ, but very, very effective.
All right, I appreciate that. So we're going to ask that same question to Elder Farrington. What's your opinion of the peaceful protests? Is it effective?
It has been very effective, but I think because we are in a microwave society, we may view it as not being. It's like if you have a headache and you pop a pill, aspirin, whatever it is, you expect the headache to go away because you swallowed it. It's right then. So when we see these protests that has been taking place in the last days and weeks, we ask, has it been successful? I think success is not measured in the immediate aftermath. Is it long term? You measure the efficacy of the aspirin or the Advil you take based on whether or not the headache returns. And so when we would know the success and efficacy as the months and years rolled on. The same as we gauge any protest in America from the right to vote, desegregation of schools and things of that nature. And we can see now where Martin Luther King can have his dream fulfilled and realized when he said, he looked for a day when his 4 little children, and every man could be judged by the content of their character, but the right to live and to work and to enjoy these unalienable rights that are embedded in the Constitution can be lived out and be experienced by all. So for me, it's when people look at it and people have grown tired because what we see as being something that we do in terms of marching as not having an impact. Yes, it has an impact. And I think for right now, the long-term success is going to be gauged over the weeks and time. But I can tell you from what it looks like now going forward, yes, it has impact, has success, but it's going to be based on how we turn around this ocean liner of systemic racism. And it's not going to something that's just make a quick U-turn. It's something that has to be engaged in terms of policies, in terms of the enacting or carrying out those policies. First, the policy is written, and then how we execute that, and then how that is received by those who are administering that in terms of the police, and then the community at large. So I think this is the first stage of it, and then we'll gauge the rest because we're blazing on the news and we got an attention, but it can't stop there. If it stopped there, to me, it'd be a failure.
Right. Thank you for that. So bringing it home to Adventism, do you think a Christian or a Seventh-day Adventist Christian should protest? And I'm going to ask Pastor Sai, what's your opinion on that?
I believe that our protest comes in different forms and fashions. I firmly believe that everyone has been gifted with different gifts. And for some, it may be to hit the streets. For others, it may be to sign the, those protests through those petitions. Others, it may be through entering into, voting or whatnot, or just stopping, supporting businesses, just to say that everyone should flood the streets. Maybe someone may not feel inclined to do that, but maybe they feel inclined to maybe write those letters to those companies, or to, do the research and let us know who are the ones that are supporting this rhetoric of racism and perpetuating that cycle. So I believe that, yes, we all have a part to play when there are people that are treated unjustly, when there are people who are marginalized, when there are people who are impoverished at the hands of oppressors. That's our responsibility from Micah 6:8. And that's what God requires of each and every one of us. He says to do justly, to love mercy. And I love what the Message says, to take God seriously. So when we do all those things, we're taking God serious at his word and what we're supposed to do here on this earth.
All right, thank you for that. I think that's you said it. You said it. But I want to talk about this because, of course, an individual who's been getting a lot of publicity, even though they are out of the, is the former quarterback, Colin Kaepernick. Colin Kaepernick used to play for the greatest football team in the NFL, the 49ers, right? That's my team, by the way. But Colin Kaepernick, back in 2016, because of police brutality, he took part of a peaceful protest. That whenever they would sing the national anthem, at one point he would sit, but then he started to kneel. And he got a lot of backlash, when all he was simply trying to do, a peaceful protest, trying to bring light to an issue that was facing our country. And so it's funny how now we realize that there was some wisdom in what he was doing. And I guess, how do you think history will view Colin Kaepernick down the road? Because it's very interesting, just looking back at even Muhammad Ali. He took a very bold stand back in the day, and he did not believe in the war, the Vietnam War, and he could not fight, could not box for 4 years, and he was ostracized. However, years, maybe decades down the road, people realized, no, he took the right stand. And how do you think that Colin Kaepernick will be viewed now? And I want to ask the person who's wearing the Colin Kaepernick shirt, if they could speak at this time, Elder Tracy.
Thank you for the softball pitch. I think you said it best. At the time when someone stands up against the norms, the view is always not a smart move. It's disaster. And one of the things I love is, and I'm not suggesting that this is the golden standard, but Wikipedia, when you search Colin Kaepernick's name in Wikipedia, the first thing that comes up is activist. The second thing that comes up is former NFL quarterback. And I think that's just a powerful statement to show the transition of, you've prepared all your life. You've played Pee Wee. You've played, as a child, high school, college, and you finally get drafted to the, National Football League, and you lead a team deep into the postseason. And for all those 49er fans, they actually haven't crossed that bridge since Joe Montana. But anyway, you do that, and then to be remembered for the thing in the end of your life versus the thing you did all your life is a powerful statement. So I think that, it's never a popular stance to take at the time. And he took a lot of backlash. And what bothers me the most about what Kaepernick took, he did try to bring, he said, the brutality against blacks in America is going unnoticed. So I'm going to use the stage that you give me. And he said, when he saw the flag go up, the flag is not represented those individuals who are being brutalized. And so he took a knee after being counseled by a former military vet. And that's what gets me the most, is a former NFL player who also served in the military, who said, rather than just sitting, how about you take a knee so it doesn't seem or be deemed as disrespectful? So the the angst that he's receiving from the American public at large is not so much because he's taking a knee. People take knees all the time, and in a showing of respect. We kneel to pray. So that's not the issue. The issue is you're doing it for this reason. That's the real pushback that he's received. And then what gets me is, but that's one thing, America at large. But what really troubles me is it was the Black athletes, Black entertainers, individuals who had a voice that spoke out against Colin Kaepernick that really troubled me. I remember Michael Vick, who we all know Michael Vick went through a trying time because a dog's life is more valuable than a Black male in this modern age that we live in. And so Michael Vick, we saw him, what he did was atrocious with respect to the dog fighting. But I mean, America lost their mind. They lost their mind. He went to prison for it. And he came out, and I thought for sure if anyone would have compassion about someone taking a stand for something, maybe Michael Vick. And I'll never forget, he made a crass statement, just a little, I say crass, but more so just a real disregarding statement about Colin Kaepernick. He needs to stop. He's going to mess up his career. And I remember his wife looked at him kind of like, "Are you serious right now?" His wife did that. And then August of last year, not even so far back as Michael Vick's statement, but August of last year, I'll be remiss if I sat here and said I didn't grow up in an era where hip hop was huge. We had a guy who once said he wore do-rags to the Grammys, pop bottles on the White House lawn, turn around and go into a joint venture with the National Football League and blast Colin Kaepernick and say, "We're past that now," for $100 million. And so things like that happen, it's really troublesome to see that as a Black people, when someone who didn't have to do it, for all intents and purposes, Colin Kaepernick has a white mother, a Black father, raised by two white parents, playing for the National Football League, and saw this atrocious act taking place and decided, you know what, I need to stand for what's right. And to have individuals who claim to be from the projects, coming from the roughest backgrounds, all this stuff, and they push back, and it's clearly financially motivated for financial gain. I have deep trouble with that, and so I applaud Colin Kaepernick for doing that. Tupac went down. He rapped, but he's actually being studied at African American Studies at Harvard. I mean, for his contributions to the African American culture here in America. And so Colin Kaepernick, I don't believe would go anything short of that. I think he'll be revered for the stand that he took. He pushed the NFL to their limits. All of a sudden, we see other NFL players finally getting the courage to speak out in that the latest video that we saw. And then finally, the NFL commissioner comes out and offers an apology that he says was past due. And he goes back and references, not by name, but the event that took place that leads into this. And so what I'm getting at is protest is never fun. It's never popular. It's never something that's going to garner the support of those around you. And it's unfortunate, again, that Kaepernick went through that. We lost a great wide receiver here in Miami. I mean, Miami's always having some issues, but we lost a wide receiver because our owner is a huge supporter of this administration, everything they stand for. And so they shipped him off because he was taking a knee. And individuals started feeling a lot of backlash. But at the end of the day, if you're not willing to lose anything, protest is not for you. And that's the short of it. And so that's all I have to say as it relates to that. And again, I just really applaud Tommy Smith and John Carlos for raising those fists. When the American flag went up, when the Star-Spangled Banner started playing, they rose that black fist. And the only reason John Carlos raised his right hand is because he forgot his gloves back at the Olympic Park and had to end up sharing with Tommy Smith. And so he had to end up raising his other hand. And the Australian brother who won the silver stood with them with a human rights patch and went on to say, even back in his country, he was going against what they were claiming to be white Australia. So again, what our voices, surely since 1968, we have more of a voice than we now than we did back then. But for some strange reason, we didn't use it. We just didn't use it. And so enough respect to Kaepernick, regardless of his personal explorations. I want to say one last thing and I'm done. A protest started a long time ago by our Black women. And this is going to be very interesting. Our Black women around the turn of in 2000 and moving forward began to protest against Dark and Lovely. They began to protest against all of these different things that were kind of burning their hair straight. And as the Black woman began to transition, and that's a term of art, by the way, I've learned over the years, as they began to transition from these perms to going natural, it began to send a message of embracing exactly who we are. Men who used to perm their hair back in the 60s and 70s, whatever it may be, it's just an embracing of who we are. And I'm telling you, there are certain protests that we've seen over the years, and finally Black women can go to work with braids and not feel uncomfortable about the kind of hairstyle they have, and having been questioned by Jane or Becky as to, oh, what is that in your hair? What is that? You know, what is that? And just feeling more comfortable in their own skin. And so those type of protests, as Pastor Sai brought out, it's not always going and putting boots on the ground, but being true to who we are as a people, and resisting the machine that they try to box us in and make us feel uncomfortable about who we are. Power to the people.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Definitely. Definitely. So, Chaplain Newton, if you can jump in there, what's your view of Colin Kaepernick and his peaceful protests, and how will he be viewed in history, later on in history?
Yes, I believe that Colin Kaepernick's protest was a genius move, because he did not use any force. He just knelt down, and he knelt down for a reason. What he had to deal with was terrible from the NFL, but what he drew light to was what's most important. And I feel that that's the issue that we have now, because the biggest issue from the situation is that people don't understand why he knelt. All they saw was that he was desecrating or being disrespectful to the flag. And so they didn't understand the reason to why he did what he did. And so that's why you have so many different views on the situation. But I believe that he's going to be remembered as a Rosa Parks. He will be remembered as one of the greats. And the only reason why I say that is because through all he went through trying to get back with Seattle, through all he went through trying to get with different teams and getting back into the NFL, he still stood by what he believed in. And so, you know, we've had a lot of bad backlash with the situation, but other athletes have backed him. LeBron James backed him. You have people now wearing shirts with him looking like Fidel Castro. So he is being immortalized as far as for what he's done in that particular situation. So I think that he will be remembered as one of the greats for what he did for this particular situation. And honestly, I have a lot of respect for him for that, because at the same time, listen, he did this, 2 years after he went to the Super Bowl. And so we went to the Super Bowl. He went to the peak of almost winning a championship. And he realized he could have put more action into his career and being a great quarterback. I went to the Super Bowl. I played against the Ravens. I played against Ray Lewis. I could have won a championship. I could have won. I could have been immortalized in the NFL. I made it to the top. And he realized that, listen, is this ring more important than these Black folks' lives? And he realized how important our lives are more important. And so to me, the way he protested was perfect. And I have the utmost respect for Colin Kaepernick.
All right. Appreciate that. Appreciate that. Now, we do want to give some love to another athlete who played for one of the greatest dynasties in basketball, Chaplain Newton. And I know you know who that is. We want to give some love to the Chicago Bulls. But there was an athlete, Craig Hodges. Now, Craig Hodges, his story really is not really told, but Craig Hodges was a sharpshooter. He played for the Chicago Bulls with Michael Jordan. And the thing is that during the finals, when Chicago played the Lakers, he went to Michael Jordan. He went to Magic Johnson. He said, listen, let us boycott. Let's boycott the NBA finals, talk about the issues, of course, with police brutality. Let's deal with this. And of course, Michael Jordan and Magic Johnson said, no, that's too harsh of a move. But the beautiful thing about Craig Hodges is that when Chicago won the NBA championship, he went to the White House and he gave Bush a letter a letter basically telling the problems in our country. Now, what people don't realize is that after he did this, he was blackballed. He could not play anymore in the NBA. And in fact, in 1996, he actually sued the NBA for $40 million because he was blackballed, never was able to play again, even though he won the 3-point shooting contest 3 times. And so, but he is, of course, Colin Kaepernick. But before Colin Kaepernick, he tried to stand up for what was right. And then going back to the original question, he was his brother's keeper. He was trying his best to look out for others, even though he had millions of dollars coming in, like Colin Kaepernick. They were willing to sacrifice for what they believed in. And this is what we need to do as Christians. But let's move this conversation along because unfortunately, as we know, that we have some individuals in the church, sometimes young adults, young people, and even others who are sometimes disturbed about the inaction of the church, during these times. And I want to ask maybe our 2 millennials this question. What can the church do to be more active during this time? Pastor Sai.
I think that's a really powerful question that you asked, Pastor Newton. One of the things that the church can do is to really begin to educate our youth and our young adults about the racial tensions that we have even within our church. There's a lot of questions. I sat on a panel yesterday, and there are a lot of people who have questions about the necessity for regional and state conferences. And I know that we've tried our best to have those discussions, and we know that they've happened years ago, but we see the impacts still till this day where people still don't understand that necessity of why our conferences are separated. That's one. 2, it's, just being more relevant, where there are a lot of youth and young adults, they're looking to celebrities and influencers to kind of lead the way on social injustice issues, on racism. And it's hard for people to see that their church, yes, they look to the overarching GC leadership or maybe other tiers of leadership within our church, but there are many conversations that I have with my peers that they get a little bit discouraged when they don't see that the church, is on the front lines. And, I have to remind them that we're not just on the front lines when we're marching, but we do have our food pantries, and we do have at DOZ our cakes that we give, our diaper cakes and stuff like that. There are different ways that we give through social injustice and stuff like that. But they just want to hear from us. They want to make sure that they have a voice, that they feel affirmed when they're on the front lines protesting, that they're not just winging it and they don't have any guidance. And I think one way that we can affirm them in all those attempts is just bringing them in and educating them. And I think there's a lot of miseducation, which keeps them on the fringes, on the fences, to say, well, my church doesn't matter. How could they not be out there marching for these causes that we're passionate about? And the big thing about it is the gap. We have to bridge the gap, because there are times when, there are issues that we don't want to talk about that is very prevalent within our churches. And I get it, there are times when you have to kind of be delicate with it because of culture, so on and so forth. But we definitely have to give ear to those things if we truly want to minister to those that have questions and want to be a part. They want to belong, believe, but we have to make that possible for them at every step.
Right. Thank you. I know even though you may not be a millennial, Elder Farrington, you're Generation Xer like me. And so, but what do you think that the church can do? I don't know if you can maybe.
Yes, I think first and foremost, Pastor Sai hit on all the points that is necessary in terms of allowing them to feel like they have a voice, allowing them to feel that they have backing from the institution. So like I say, they're not winging it in terms of education in doing so. So there must be a concerted plan. When we can go back to the stage of our lives where they are in, we know that just from a anatomical sense, we have the most energy during that phase. And what it is, a lot of times, when it's bottled up, it creates a feeling of being trapped and suffocation, not in a literal sense, but in a figurative sense, in terms of they want a release, they want to know that they matter, and then they want to be able to channel that. And so we have to be able to channel that in a positive way, as Martin Luther King preached nonviolence approach, and taking it and let it be systemic or systematic in terms of how we engage, and understand that we are doing so under the Christian umbrella. A lot of times people get lost in the protesting, and we see the looting and the rioting and other things that goes along with it, throwing bricks at police officers, things of that nature. And that's not the correct spirit to embody or to imbue. And so I feel that it's important that if you go back to the civil rights marches and things of the 60s and the 50s and 60s, it was young people sitting at counters. They had sit-ins. And so they were actively engaged in the process. And many of them have gone on to be lawmakers and in influential positions, because that gave them a sense of their responsibility to live to the best of their abilities, for its education, being model citizens in society. And then now they're bringing up their children and infusing them in that spirit of activism, the spirit of protest when there is injustice, and knowing their rights, or knowing that when things need to change and the process involved. So we have to be able to channel that energy, because it's there. They're full of it. We have to be able to captivate their minds in a positive and insightful way, that as they engage in these participation, that we are marching under the umbrella of Christ, and we're taking Christ with us wherever we go. But we can't be on the sideline any further, as we have been as a church, as an institution, and just want to preach this gospel. As long as Christ says, "You of the world and in the world," I mean, when you are something you are part of, and then there's a need to be active in these activities here. As long as we're, talking about being our brother's keepers, then there's a need for all to be engaged in these activities. And so I would allow them, all of us, to be able to express that in terms of participation, because what they're seeing around them, if you see it now, there's youth from all over, white, black, from various ethnic groups, and to tell them to sit on the sideline, sit this out, because it's not involving Christian principle, advancing the kingdom of God, where it's a great injustice.
Definitely appreciate that. And so, for those of you who may or may not know, that there are conferences who are speaking out against what has been going on. And so you look at the North American Division, they issued a statement speaking out against the social injustices. The GC has posted a statement. When you look at even Southeastern Conference next week, the 13th, next Sabbath afternoon, I believe it is at 5 p.m., the president of our conference, President Gregory Mack, with the youth director, Pastor Prince Lewis, they're going to be hosting a peaceful protest at the Northside Church in the parking lot. And so they're going to do one in Miami. And then from what I understand, they're going to do one in Orlando. And then I believe they were going to do one in Tampa. And so, there are conferences that are speaking out. I know in South Atlantic, I know that the youth director there, Dr. Donovan Washington, have been having programs speaking out about injustices. I believe Beta, the youth directors, the Black youth directors of the regional conferences, they doing something about it. And so for the young people who are listening, young adults, that our church is not trying to be silent. We are trying to speak out against this. This is why we have this forum, and we realize that there is a problem, and we're going to try to move this thing forward. That's the goal. But let's try to move on, because I wanted to try to do this for an hour, and time is almost gone. I think this is what I tried to do last week, but we went about an hour and a half. But I want to talk about Drew Brees. He is a quarterback who plays for the Saints, New Orleans Saints. And what you have to understand about who Drew Brees is, he is an individual who won the Walter Payton Man of the Year award. He has given millions of dollars when Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, given millions of dollars to the rebuilding of New Orleans. Just recently, he has actually given $5 million to help feed those who don't have jobs and don't have money during this whole pandemic situation. However, Drew Brees has said some very interesting things in light of everything that's happening, in light of the social injustices which happened with George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery. For some reason, I don't know why, he would bring up again not kneeling during the national anthem. And I think it was, a little bit tone deaf, and I don't know why he would make those comments during this time. But what is your view on Drew Brees? What he said, he tried to retract what he said when he got a lot of blowback from his teammates, his wide receivers who he's supposed to be throwing to next year. What is your view on Drew Brees? I'm going to ask that question to Mr. Kaepernick, Elder Tracy.
Well, as you brought his name up, I had to end up getting a cool drink to probably cool off a little bit. I'll say this. I think it's interesting how an individual is so against kneeling, but doesn't bring up the fact that someone kneeled on a black man's neck and killed him, but brings up the fact that a man kneeled on grass or turf. And so I think to kneel on artificial grass versus kneeling on a live neck. And the best issue you have to bring up in that moment is you would never condone kneeling on artificial grass with everything going on around you. But I'm grateful. I am so grateful that he was baited by the interviewer, by the reporter, and he ate the bait and he went with it. I'm grateful for that, because a lot of times we immortalize certain individuals and we don't recognize that they don't like you. They don't understand your plight. They could care less about your plight. And so all the money that he's given, all the philanthropy and the Walter Payton Award that he's received, it's easy to give money it's easy for me to give $1 million when I have 100 of them coming in this year. But to actually go out and say and make a statement about someone's life having value, that's more difficult for me to fork over, and that's a difficult thing. I'll just say Drew Brees is no saint, and I would be interested to know. I came up with that one on my own. I would be interested to know. He's tried to retract the statements, but my whole thing is own it. You made them, you believe them, you said it, just own it. And once you own it, we can have more respect because we know what we're dealing with, as opposed to a person who says these things, goes back and says, I'll do a better job of trying to understand what my teammates are experiencing and ask for them to help me do that. I don't want to jump ahead, but it's not their responsibility. And, someone said it best. I got a clip from Inside the NBA this past week. And even though there's no NBA, so there was Inside the NFL, it seemed, that particular night. And they were dealing with the comments by Drew Brees. And many of us know the personalities that are on that show. It was Charles Barkley, Shaquille O'Neal, Kenny Smith, or Kenny the Jet Smith, as he was referred to, and then Ernie Johnson. He is the white facilitator for that group. And it was interesting that Charles Barkley led the conversation. Shaquille O'Neal followed up with comments, and apparently Shaquille O'Neal was available for the post-comments meeting that Brees had with the team along with Coach Payton. and then Kenny, and then Ernie gave his position, and then Kenny gave his. And it was interesting to hear. And the biggest problem we have in America, it's not just the white supremacy, it's the individuals that look like us that perpetuate white supremacy. And by that, I simply mean Charles Barkley has made some statements in the past that I found to be troublesome, but that particular night, he had a real objection to the black players who didn't kneel with Kaepernick and how they went overboard in their response to Drew Brees' comments and how they just went overboard. He didn't even deal with Drew Brees. You know, I know him, and I don't think he's a racist. He just made a mistake. But I think the backlash was just too much. And then, so we had the empathy from Barkley. Then we had Shaquille O'Neal, who many of us may not know, became a chairman of Papa John's after the statements were made about blacks by Papa John. When he was in his board meeting talking about how colorfully he described black people, and it wasn't that they were black people. And then Shaquille O'Neal was recruited in, given a slew of money to come and try and rehabilitate the image of Papa John's and put a black face on it. And he did it. He took the money and he began to try and help the face of Papa John's. And just listening to those two individuals, those large voice, those millionaire voices, and it had to be a white man, and Ernie Johnson, who stood up and said, well, no, I think what he did was wrong, and I can understand why you wouldn't want to, understand more. And I'm listening to this, I'm thinking to myself, why is it that the two of you are being taught by a white man? And then finally, Kenny Smith has wrapped it up and said, look, I just heard the apology. I'm still digesting that, but I'm really offended by his comments, and it's not my responsibility to teach him. And now going back to the Brother's Keeper initiative, or being my brother's keeper, Kenny Smith's argument was, and it was very articulate and very profound, it's not my responsibility to teach you the things that you can learn yourself if you had the interest to learn them. And with Google the way it is, with the internet the way it is, if you really want to learn the plight of your black teammates, if you want to learn the plight of black America, you can do so. I heard another gentleman who I never thought I'd ever quote in any kind of a positive light, but Skip Bayless on Undisputed with Shannon Sharp. Skip Bayless was saying stronger words of just condemning the statements by Drew Brees. And these two black athletes that have come up, one of them was born in Alabama. And so I don't understand for the life of me how it is that money can cause you to lose sight of your person. And so I think about Judas. And I think about a man who was willing to sell out Christ for 30 pieces of silver. And when he realized what he did was wrong, and he literally, when I say what he did was wrong, that he just messed up pretty much. It seemed like a good idea. I suspect these gentlemen who will become the 2020 version of Judas, who you just sold out your race because it suited your time for your machine to keep on producing. I think it's going to come back. I think it's going to bite heavy. I think right now it's biting Beyonce's husband very heavy because of what he said in August of last year. And I think when I look at someone like Michael Jordan, I enjoyed The Last Dance. I was a huge Jordan fan. That was my era. I watched the games, spent an inordinate amount of money on the shoes. But when I can look at someone like Michael Jordan and make the comment that he made about Republicans buy my shoes too, and he, billionaire status, was able to sit down in his home and say, it was a joke at the time when I said it on the team bus. I shouldn't have said it. At least backing away from those comments, and then I think it was a day or two ago, pledged $100 million to stop racial injustice, and then sent out a letter. We've never heard Michael Jordan make a comment about any injustice or issue that has hit the forefront. And for him to make that statement in that letter, I think there comes a time in life, you look back on your life, you begin to review your life and realize, if I had to do it over again, maybe I would have told Craig Hodges, that's a good idea. Let's talk about this. Let's figure out how we can do this, as opposed to getting where you are and looking back on life with regret. And one of the worst things you want to do, and I think Pastor Sai was saying to the young people as well, empower them now so they don't have regrets later on. This is the first time we've had a fight in almost 50 years. This generation has never fought for anything. Let's fight strategically. Let's fight smart. But for goodness sake, let's fight. Let's fight.
Appreciate those comments. Appreciate those comments. Definitely want to shout out to those of you who are watching. I see some of these comments from Facebook. It is straight up comedy, Paxton. You're making me laugh. But I want to ask this question to Chaplain Newton. I love what one of my colleagues in ministry has posted, Pastor Marlon Lamont. He says, I believe that Drew Brees, he spoke from the heart, and his apology was simply for public relations and damage control, and that he's going to have a hard time with his teammates next season. What do you think? Because, of course, I've heard so much that Drew Brees, of course, is a man of integrity. He's a Christian, and all great things about him. Do you think that this apology was from the heart, or was this public relations? Chaplain.
Honestly, the way I feel is I side with Elder Tracy as far as he should have stand by his comments. But sometimes one thing I do know, and I'm not saying that for this case is what it is, a lot of times when there's interviews, they ask a lot of things out of context, and answers are taken out of context and thrown a certain way. I'm not saying that this is what happened with Drew Brees, but a lot of times that's what happens. I think that, honestly, I don't know where he was in his mind, but if that's truly how he feels, he does need to stand by it. And it's going to affect him next year, especially with his teammates. But I like how some people stood behind him, as well as Malcolm Jenkins, his former teammate. He agreed. He sent out a tweet agreeing with him and having his back. And so, I mean, some people may feel that it's public relations. It could be true, but I believe his teammates, they do feel that he was speaking from the heart when he apologized. And so, if the teammates have his back, if as a Christian, we're supposed to forgive people when they do and they make a mistake. And his teammates have forgiven him. I do believe that Michael Thomas, the defensive Davis, and all the other players have forgiven him, and they took a stand behind him. I think the team will back him for next year. But to say that it was public relations, yeah, I do feel that it is. It was public relations. I do feel it was public relations.
All right. So, Elder Farrington, you can jump in.
Yeah, I know you're going to move this along now. I'll say this very quickly. I don't think it's a matter of them having his back. He didn't have their backs. So when he said that he would never respect someone that kneels for the flag, best believe it's coming again when the NFL starts play again. So what would be his true heart then? Say that they have forgiven, moved on. So is he seizing now when you see these men kneel? It's going to be across the NFL. We're going to see the NFL commissioner already apologize. We want to see what the owner is going to do, because we can say, hey, it's all water on the bridge. But when you revisit something, these things happen. I'm just like, hey, how many times shall I forgive my brother? Or how many times would Drew Brees, a 16-game season, be willing to say, okay, y'all go right ahead. I'm cool with that. Or will I join you now? Because he realized that it has been a nightmare, because all that you have done be wiped away in an instance. The good, the Walter Payton Man of the Year, the $5 million donation, and whatever he's done after Katrina. When folks see that there is some shadiness in you, or let me say this here: white America think that they own the gloriousness of being a war soldier. We all like to point out my grandfather and my brother and somebody, as if when the flag the kneeling took place, like they were the only ones that was fighting or a part of the army. So they think they own that history, they own that experience. So he wants to draw back and talk about his grandfather fighting. Man, every war that he had in America, Black participated in. So do we get to claim ownership any of that? And when we look at how it seems to be justified now for many to point back to those individuals who are armed servicemen and women, as to allow them a platform to spew their vitriol in regards to the athletes that kneel because they had someone who fought and died in the war, as if they were only participants in the war. We're not justified in having those emotions. So I think with Drew Brees, his career or the projection for it would not be viewed the same, no matter how he finishes out. I'm sad to say, because I do think, he has done well on and off the field in terms of being a model citizen. But when you understand who people are on the inside, it kind of makes you kind of like, whoa, this is how you truly felt about me? This is how you see this here? And like Jason said, you can kneel on a man's neck, but you have a problem kneeling on turf. I rest my case.
All right, thank you for that. So we need to try to get the preacher involved. I know I've been doing a lot of talking, want to get Pastor Sy involved with the conversation. And my wife, having a conversation with my wife, she says, it's really hard at her place of employment because, of course, with some of her coworkers, they keep bringing up the riots, the destruction of property. And as a Christian, how do you respond to those individuals who want to make negative comments about the riots, the protests, instead of talking about the cause of these protests and the social injustices? How do you deal with these coworkers? How do you even try to reach them? And as being your brother's keeper, how do you try to bring them up to understand what Black and brown people are going through in this country?
What I would say to that is, I don't condone the rioting or, just people going in and looting and stuff like that. I still think it's wrong, but because of people's, mistrust in our community, it's led people to do that. But then also on, at the workforce, it's hard to change people's mind. You can talk to them, you can preach at them all you want about your own views, but as far as trying to convince a person on what the right thing to do is, it's pretty hard. And sometimes you have to kind of leave it to, I have to live it. If I'm preaching to them, am I living what I'm preaching? Because sometimes, we can preach it, but not live it. I was reading a comment and someone said, how can we reach people if we're not on the front lines with the people? Those are the people that we need to reach the most. So I also say about that is also, not just, are we practicing what we preach? Not only are we reaching them in that way, but then also we have to kind of just still show love, still show compassion, because the reality is, there are going to be those agitators that they're set, they're stuck, but you have to love them in spite of that. I know it sounds hard. How can you say such a thing like that? But it goes back to the point of what Chaplain Newton said. We do call ourselves Christians, and I'm reminded that in the Bible, it says the wheat and tare will grow together until harvest. And these are things that you can expect. There will be people that disagree with us. There will be climates and places that we go to that will have that bad energy. So we look to our supervisors to set the tone. And if they're not setting the tone, then we hope that there's other people that are our team that is able to have confidence and to have that voice to maybe send out that company-wide email, just so that it can give room to other people that may be feeling the same thing. Give them a space that they can share and that they can dialogue about what's happening and what are the next steps moving forward. Because in fact, we don't want it to be an uncomfortable environment, but maybe people just don't know how to have those conversations, and empowering them to kind of break the ice in some way, shape, or fashion. It will help to hopefully smooth things for the better.
All right, thank you for that. Ask that same question to Elder Tracy. How, as a Christian, do we deal with these coworkers who all they want to focus in on is the protest and the destruction of property versus the real issue and the police brutality?
I was hoping someone could help. Pastor Sy gave, I think, the best insight. It's hard. People come to the table, they're already predisposed. They already have the discussions. And I'll say this, and be very short. A lot of times, people of other ethnic makeups have a discussion before they see you, and they feel so passionately about it. They want to be able to say it to the person that they're talking about. And so they'll see the news, they'll see a poor or a misportrayal of those who are going out and creating all types of havoc on the community. And they'll have a discussion around the dinner table, and they really want to come back to work, and they want to say it to a Black person. They want to say it to a person who's Hispanic. They want to really get it out and say it to you. And so they'll come and to be very, you know, insular or covert and just, you know, I just think we should really just, I mean, it's where they live. I don't understand, you know, that's where they live. They should just take care of where they live. I mean, why would you want to burn where your house, where you live? And so I think when we hear Amy at work, we just have to know we're dealing with Amy. And, you know, we do have to rise above it, but it doesn't mean that you compromise your integrity as to what your position is and what's right. And so I think I'll just say that the Central Park video, I think, is for me, the action of a Christian. Can you please leash your dog? Never said anything derogatory, didn't yell, didn't show. I mean, to me, he showed Christ this, and he knew he put his proper protection up. Can you leash your dog? And she went ballistic. And then at the end of it, thank you. And that, you know, and just went on his way. And I think if we handle Amy's like that, I think that that might be the most effective thing for us to do in 2020.
Chaplain Newton, what's your response to that? How do we deal with coworkers who that's all they want to talk about are riots and destruction of property? As a Christian, how do you deal with that? How do you try to help that individual to come on higher ground, to understand African-American perspective?
I mean, people have different views on everything. And so first thing we have to do is respect their views. We can't attack somebody because of how they view something. And so we do have to talk to them in love, show them love, because you are the example as the Christian. I mean, when you're going out to meet somebody, if you are the light in the darkness, then you have to go to them in love and speak to them in a certain kind of way. And I know it's hard to deal with somebody who is constantly belligerent, or who has an attitude, or who's just focusing only on the negative. And so, you know, you have to speak positive. You have to talk with them. And if they don't want to, you know, deal with it in that manner, I mean, I would just sit and listen. I would let them be irate, but I wouldn't sit there and fuss with them. There's a saying they always say, a wise man says you can't argue with fools, because people from a distance can't tell who's who. So if they're going to be acting foolish at the workplace, your best bet is just to be humble in the situation. If you can decrease or derail the situation, you try to. But if not, I would just, as a Christian, I would try and give them some advice. But if they're not willing to listen and they're constantly just more into the protest, more crazy, I just let them be them, and we'll focus on me.
All right. Elder Farrington, I don't know if you can give us some advice. This is a tough one. But as Christians, we listen, we live in a world, it's not a bubble. And you know that sometimes you're going to hear things that are going to make you get upset. But as a Christian, how do you respond? How do you deal with these coworkers?
It's very challenging, and it's not a one size fit all, I would say, policy, so to speak. You gotta understand who you're talking to and their likelihood, if they're combustible, in terms of, if you want, like I said, your brother said, it's hard to argue with a fool, that people would see you as being acrimonious, somebody from the outside. So understand who you're talking to first. And here's what we have is the arbiter is like HR. So you can say something, they go report it, well, he said something that was threatening, or, so now your job is coming into question, because what you may think may have been a civil discussion between you and another person has been reported because they didn't get the very end of the discussion. And so we have to take that in consideration. But I think if you have somebody that you have been engaged with, maybe a coworker that you have a relationship with that may have a different viewpoint, then you can feel the need to, share your experience and to enlighten. Some coworker you see on the elevator, maybe best to let that be, not knowing that person's mental makeup and how this right here could escalate or have a warranted conversation that may bring about change. I think our first order would be to make sure that we are in a calm space, because sometimes it can bubble over. And while you may have good intentions to just speak your mind, it can be seen as over the top. So you have to make sure that you're in a good space, that you're calm, and that you can articulate that in a way that what we perceive as non-threatening, because they look at us as being threatening. So if we raise our voice, if we show passion, and then on many occasions, those who are hearing it and listening to it perceive that as a threat, real or unreal. And that's how the story will be recounted among others, in terms of how you may have used threatening tones and gesture, how they fear for their lives, or whatever it is. So we have to make sure that we're in a good space. And the only way getting that good space is make sure that you prayed up, that you have a Christian demeanor about you in being able to speak your mind. And that way you can do so in a civil discourse. I think, you first have to monitor yourself and monitor the person that you are speaking with. Because I go back to a statement, and it's probably well suited for another part of the conversation, but you can't change everybody's mindset. And so I wouldn't go around trying to crusade every time I heard a derogatory statement or somebody speak in a different light, because you'll run out of breath, so to speak, trying to make sure that everybody can hear your viewpoint or understand, or have some sort of enlightenment. You have to pick and choose your battles. That's the first one of the things I'll add with that.
All right, thank you for that. We're going to try our best to try to bring this thing home. 2 more questions. I used this quote last time, but it's a powerful quote from James Baldwin. He said it best: to be a Negro living in America and to be relatively conscious is to be enraged all of the time. And so, but as a Christian, we can't be to bitterness. We can't do that. We can't hold on to hatred. It's hard. And as a Christian, how do we find that balance? Because of course, we should not be okay with what's going on in our country, but then at the same time, we can't begin to hate people and be just as guilty as the other individuals who are, of course, have negative feelings and thoughts toward Black and brown people. One person says it best, that if I become a beast to slay a beast, all that reigns is beastliness. And so, but the key is, how, as Christians, do we deal with these negative emotions without having hate and bitterness in our heart? And so I'm going to ask that question to Jason X, if you can answer that for us, man.
It's tough. What America has done with systemic racism is that they've given us the roadmap to pacifism as the best response. And so what we end up doing is, and we teach this oftentimes through our churches, we teach ourselves this, that we ought not say anything, we ought not do anything, just keep on praying about it. And it's hard not to be hurt. A lot of times people use the verse, Jesus wept, and they say, oh, he wept because his best friend, his good friend Lazarus was dead. Doesn't make any sense. He's getting ready to raise him from the dead. So why would he be crying about it? The Bible's clear. He wept because he knew the evil that laid in their heart. And once he resurrected Lazarus, he knew the plotting that was going to take place. That was the last step for them to go ahead and take out his crucifixion ploy. We're human. We have emotions. There are principles that we live by. And those things, it hurts after a while. And one of the things my mom explained to me a while back was when you are hurt, someone hurts you, and you don't forgive, that's what breeds that bitterness. And so what we're really talking about is the forgiveness, but not the acceptance of the treatment. And it's a very delicate balance, because while I can forgive what took place 400 years ago, as far as being able to live and move on, I can't accept what you did 400 years ago and continue to do 400 years later. And so it's a troubling thing. I can forgive, and I'm saying I in a very I'm using that in a not specific to me, just in a general term. I can forgive. Again, we're all working on that, being able to forgive and not have that bitterness breed. But it's when you see the continued behavior, it cuts again, it cuts again, it cuts again, it hurts. And so what we're asking for now is corrective action. We all recognize the past will not be erased. It will not be erased what took place. There has to be an acknowledgement of what took place. There has to be an acceptance that they were wrong for what took place. And there has to be corrective action moving forward. And in seeing that, Black people are very forgiving, man. I'm just going to be perfectly frank with you. They are very forgiving. And that's one of the things that has perhaps over time stalled some of the corrective action, because we have forgiven and we have taken a lot and just, okay, and we've tried to move on. And so it's a difficult process. The whole idea with Drew Brees and his teammates saying they forgive him, Black people want to forgive. We've seen protests where police departments have come out and they said, we're here with you. They'll kneel with you and they'll show some kind of solidarity. And you see right there on the news, not fake news, but the real news, Black people reaching across and hugging police officers. We want to forgive. We're just wired to do that. And the idea is, however, when there's no acceptance that anything has taken place or anything's been transgressed, how do you move past? How do you get to that next level in a relationship for that corrective action to be implemented and carried forth? So it's tough, but I think it's certainly something we have to aspire toward.
Definitely. Ask that same question to Chaplain Newton. How as a Christian do we deal with this anger and hatred that sometimes may build up when you see all of these injustices? How do you try to protect yourself from having this in your heart?
The first thing comes to my mind when you ask that question, in January, I did an event where Michael Vick was signing autographs. And when I was walking to the area, I saw nothing but PETA, people who were, still antagonizing against him for what he did with those dogs. Now, he served his time, he did everything, but they still haven't forgiven him for what he did with those dogs. And so as a Christian, when we look at this particular situation and you look at what we're taught, we Christian, the key word Christian, followers of Christ, Jesus, yes, he was human, but he still forgave. He said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. I feel as it with this particular time, we have to emulate Jesus in every form and facet. I know things may be tough and everything that we see, and it's crazy, but more than anything, when we got baptized and we gave our all to God, we weren't just Black. We became followers of Christ, and we given our all to God. And so if we really truly are fighting the good fight, we have to walk the same way as Jesus would walk. And things may be tough, things may be hard, but we have to continue to forgive no matter what. And I know things are tough, but we have to, when I seen the situation with PETA, the people were still throwing things at Michael Vick, and Michael Vick did his time. He did his time, but the people still did not forgive him for what transpired in 2005. We're in 2020, and they're holding on to something. Why hold on to something for so long? It's better to forgive and move on. And we'll never understand God's ways truly, but that is the right way to do is to forgive and move on.
All right, Pastor Sai, what's your perspective on it? Let's hear a pastor's perspective on this. How do we protect ourselves from bitterness and hatred?
I mean, it's easier said than done, because we are not absent of the emotions that we have and that we're feeling about what's, transpired. And, I think the book of Ecclesiastes says it best, that there's a time and place for everything under the sun. There are times when we are allowed to grieve, mourn, get angry, be in pain, be happy, be joyful. And I think right now that's a time where we're at right now, where we're just frustrated, we're tired, but it's not a place where we stay at always. Just because when we allow that to linger, it does lead to that bitterness, it leads to that resentment. And even in some cases, it leads to wrath. And that's when it gets really complicated and sometimes very harmful, not only to ourselves, but to others. So we have to really be able to find that balance, through all of this racial trauma and everything that's been going on. There has still been a wave of talking about mental health, because, we have to really take a step back and to do some introspection. We have to ask ourselves those hard questions like, why am I this angry, and be bold enough to address it. And sometimes we can say, oh, I know why I'm mad, because I saw that clip where a man, was in the street, and this police officer was kneeling on his neck. And we have to kind of reel it in. And, we have to do some self-care rituals to make sure that we don't allow those things to fester, to linger, because then they impact the rest of our other relationships. It pours into our friendships, our families, our marriages, maybe some of the work that we're doing, whether it's for whatever task that we have at hand. And the reality is we don't want it to impact those areas. Without even realizing, I would dare to say that there have been some people, without wanting to lash out in frustration, but by the very nature of them being in that pot of anger, they have reacted to some people irrationally. They have reacted with some people without even thinking with a straight mind. And when we see ourselves getting to that place, then we have to begin to start unplugging. We have to, start, not tuning into the news. Whatever is feeding that will ultimately grow within us. But when we stop feeding it, then we can stop allowing it to grow. It doesn't make it seem like, okay, we're absent of the anger. No, we're still angry, but I'm just choosing a different way of how I exercise that anger. Yes, I want it to be addressed, as we all do, but we know that in time, the process will happen. And, hopefully we'll get the outcome that we're protesting for, that, we're out there, speaking against for. And the prayer is that justice will be served. As I've been saying this whole week, justice is not the absence of mercy, but it is the presence of just mercy.
Good stuff. Good stuff. I like what Pastor Lamont says. Forgiveness frees us from the prison of ourselves. But we're going to try to end on this last question. But I see Elder Farrington, definitely jump in there.
Well, I thought this may have been the last one, so that's why.
No problem. No problem. Go ahead.
I raised my hand. But I'll say this here. So if we turn our minds and attention to Ephesians, the 6th chapter, in verse 12, Paul gives some very poignant advice. It says, "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, against the spiritual wickedness in high places. Wherefore, take unto you the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day." When we look at what is going on, the injustices going around, we have to realize that we wrestle not against flesh and blood. We cannot begin to see people as our enemy, even though we see them standing in the way of some rightful activities, or the ability to protest or live life in a certain manner, because we understand that the devil is behind the scene of all this angst, anxiety, evilness. And so when we put man in a position as being the enemy, and that what goes back to the question, am I my brother keeper? He tells us in verse 11, and also the following verse in verse 14. Stand therefore, having your loins girded about with truth, and telling us to put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day. So he's encouraging us to put on the whole armor of God, that we may be able to withstand, because we wrestle not against flesh and blood. So when we see a police officer kneeling on someone's neck to the point of death, we consider that the evil day. When we see individuals coming over from Mexico into the U.S. and they're put in cages like animals, would that be the evil day? When we see people not having access to health care or affordable housing, or being have the right to vote without being suppressed, would that be the evil day? And so when we see all the injustices in society, Paul saying, hey, you can get enraptured and consumed by this. With our rage, where have you pointed at someone you see as being the person responsible for it? Say, in light of that, remember that we wrestle not against flesh and blood. Romans 3:23, we read that all have sinned, have come short of the glory of God. So it's true that every saint has a past and every sinner has a future. Then we have to be mindful that these are people that need the Spirit of Christ, that they need Christ. And so our approach has to be mindful of that. And so Paul equips us to be dressed appropriately from head to toe, so that we may be able to withstand in the evil day. If you follow history, which we all have in terms of biblical history, we understand that we are living in the end of time. All these things where the love of many shall wax cold, and wars and rumors of wars, and all these things that Christ said that will be happening. And it's not yet. Understand, you have reached the time or the end, the last days. And so, but I think that as Christians, that we have to understand that what separates us from others who may be out there protesting and doing other things is that we recognize that man is not our enemy. Never have, never will be. We understand that men can be used by the enemy, and that's where we direct our anger, our hate, our frustration, our discontent. Understand that everybody stand in need of Christ as we have Christ, and so that's what we look to offer the world. And so I think that's how the Christian mindset should be. Understanding that there's an enemy behind the scene that is orchestrating these events or these people to act in a certain manner. Because we have Christ, we can stand to not be caught up in the fray, and to exhibit model Christian behavior, while at the same time letting it be known to the institution and the individuals that we're not going to take it any longer.
Thank you for that. And so we are basically almost out of time, but I just have one last question. I'm going to ask this to Elder Tracy, and then of course we're going to ask Pastor Sy to bring it all together. Now, what do we do now in the meantime? Okay, I believe, in my opinion, that the peaceful protests have been very successful. I don't think that the other 3 officers would have been arrested without the protest. I don't think that that officer who put his knee on George Floyd's neck would have gotten a second charge without the protest. And so is the fight over? What do we now do in the meantime as Christians? Is the fight over? What should we do? And I want to ask that question to Elder Tracy, and then Pastor Sy will close us off.
First and foremost, we've applied pressure. They hear us now. The question is, okay, what do we want them to hear us say? And so there has to be a collective voice, collective reasoning. I've said it before, this country understands economic sanctions. They do it across the world in so many ways. So I think we, as a people, need to start applying some economic sanctions and some issues financially for this country to feel the impacts. One of the reasons I think we have so many companies jumping up and speaking, I think some of them are outraged. And just a quick footnote, I did buy some Ben & Jerry's ice cream yesterday. But there are companies who we've never heard say a word before that now are supporting Black Lives Matter. They're no longer saying social injustice, not trying to fix it up and try and, say it in a more palatable way for the mainstream. They're actually saying Black Lives Matter. Amazon has come out very strong supporting Black lives, and now they're actually giving free streaming services for certain movies that speak to social injustice against Black individuals. You have the chairman of Reddit, who stepped down to vacate his seat to give it the opportunity to have a Black person sit on that board of directors. And so, the position is, look, at the end of the day, we have children, we have interactions that we're going to have to look other people in the face and be able to say at the end of the day, here's what I did when I saw what happened with George Floyd. And we're all praying that whatever we do moving forward is a collective voice, a strong enough voice, much like they did in Birmingham, where they could feel the impact of the Blacks in the society. And anyone else who wants to join with us as well. But we have enough buying power, we have enough financial power to have this country feel us and press against them where they where it feels the most. And in addition to that, also going out in local elections and making them feel our presence there as well. Sheriff elections, state attorney elections, elections for judges. These things in a local arena have a huge impact on what ends up happening to our society, to our family members, to our friends. And oftentimes we go to court, you don't know any of the people who are in there. But guess who knows? Our counterparts, they know the individuals who are there because their dad hosted a fundraiser or whatever it may be for those individuals. So we have to get involved economically. We have to start pooling our money, figuring out if there's a Black bank that is local, open up a savings account in a Black bank. Why not? They did that. I just learned last week. They did that in Atlanta and caused Wells Fargo to come and actually give loans, mortgages to Black families, not people of color, again, not those who are disproportionately represented, but just straight up Black families, because the Black dollar means something. It has an impact. So I know there's a bank in Miami that is a Black bank, historically still is. But again, looking at our areas, doing some resourcing, supporting Black businesses, allowing us to not have the Walmarts of the world continue to be a conglomerate and overrun our communities. It's happening a lot. And the last thing I'll say is, whatever we do, let's make sure that at the end of every one of those commercials we see, every one of those videos we're hearing online, let's pray to God that George Floyd's name is the last name in those videos. God bless.
I'll just add on that, as I continuously think about what do we do from here in the meantime, my first thoughts are to continue with the prayers. I believe that God still is here on this earth. I know that we're experiencing a lot of what prophecy says is what the days will look like as we come closer to the second coming of Christ. But, the four winds are still being held back by the mercy and graces of God. So we still have a duty to pray and to seek God's face for direction. And then after we've prayed, then we are to protest. Continue. I believe that there is power in our protest. There's power when we say that we're not going to go and support these institutions that are, perpetuating that systemic racism, that pour money into these campaigns, that have local leaders that are speaking blatantly against the movements that are trying to bring harmony and unity within our communities. I'm also saying petitions. There's some petitions that are out there. I believe that they're useful. I believe that they're beneficial. And they have organizations that are spearheading them. So if you want to learn more about it, just go on Facebook or other social media entities to learn how you can all you have to do is put your name, last name, your zip code, your email address, and boom, you're added to a number. But make sure it's an informed petition. Make sure you're just not doing it just to do it, but you want to be informed in everything that you're doing. For our pastors and the laity, continue to preach. This stuff helps. Having these forums, they really, really do help, because it helps us to know, to get that encouragement for people who are on the front lines, who are out there, just speaking against this injustice. We still need our cisterns filled when we are out there emptying them out. Educating people. There's still a lot of people, and sometimes we say that, it's just maybe our white counterparts or others that may not understand the plight of a Black person, but there are some Black people, African Americans, Caribbeans, that don't know the history, the rich history of our culture. And I believe that it is incumbent upon us to go out there to educate them, to let them know why we are hitting the streets, why we are protesting, why we are acting in the manner that we are acting. It's just not because of just one man, but this is something that has been happening years on and generations. This is generational trauma that we are experiencing. So I think it's our time to educate and then unapologetically speak against racism and dismantle systems of oppression, and how God leads you to do that. You pray about it in your secret closet. For some, it may be protesting. For others, it may be stopping that money trail to go to these institutions. But we do all of this in the name of God's love. You know, I'm not saying get a spirit of hate. No, no, no. But God should be the motivator behind everything that we see happening. And He'll lead us to what we need to do and how to do it moving forward.
Thank you so very much. Very enlightening conversation that we had, very much needed. And I know we can go on and on. A lot needs to be said, but all good things do come to an end. And so we are going to end with a word of prayer. Pastor Sai, if you could just, of course, give us our final prayer at this time as we close out this discussion.
Absolutely. Dear God, we just want to say thank you so much for just allowing us to have a forum where we can talk and discuss how we should move forward in the meantime. We thank you for all of our viewers that are interested, that want to know more. I pray, Father, that you would point them to the resources that they need. And as leaders of your church, that we will be equipped with the tools to share with them so that they can be mobilized, whether it's social media, whether it's in their local community, whether they are deported at their jobs. God, I pray that you do that. I pray for those that are hurting right now, those that are in need of comfort. You said, blessed are those that mourn, for they shall be comforted. So God, bless them, God. I pray you comfort them, Father. Be with the families that had to bury their loved ones over the course of time, Father. Allow them to know weeping may endure for a night, but joy certainly comes in the morning light. And until next time, God, I pray that our viewers will learn more and grow as we grow, God. And we thank you for all that you've done. And thank you for a new week. We just entered into a new week as the sun has set. And I pray that we'll go and do some amazing things. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen. God bless you all. God bless you all.